The biting wind cut through the city streets, howling like a ghost in the alleys and between towering buildings. Snowflakes fluttered under the flickering glow of streetlights, layering over the pavement like a cruel, indifferent blanket. It was a night that no one should be outside. And yet, there she was. Olivia Carter sat against the brick wall of a closed storefront, her arms wrapped tightly around her two children. Lucas and Mia clung to her, their tiny bodies trembling in the cold. Their clothes were too thin for the brutal winter, their shoes barely holding together, and their faces pale from exhaustion. Lucas coughed, his small chest heaving against her. Olivia ran her freezing fingers over his forehead, feeling the heat of fever beneath his clammy skin. She swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to stay strong. They had been moving from shelter to shelter, but tonight the beds were full. She had begged, pleaded, but it didn't matter. The system wasn't built for people like her. A single mother, broke and abandoned, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Maya clutched Olivia's sleeve, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Olivia closed her eyes. The last meal they had was yesterday, a half-eaten sandwich a stranger had tossed their way. Her stomach was empty, gnawing at her insides, but she didn't care about herself. She cared about them. "Just hold on a little longer, baby. I promise I'll find something soon." Mia nodded, trusting her without hesitation, even as the reality of their situation screamed otherwise. Across the street, the world continued without them. People walked past, their heads down, their hands tucked inside expensive coats. They didn't stop, they didn't look. To them, Olivia and her children were nothing more than shadows, an inconvenience they could ignore. And then, one man looked. A sleek black limousine rolled to a stop at the intersection. Inside, Daniel Grant sat, watching through the tinted glass. He wasn't sure what made him look. Perhaps it was the way she was huddled, shielding her children from the wind. Perhaps it was the exhaustion in her posture, the desperation she tried so hard to hide. Or perhaps it was the silver ring on her hand. His chest tightened. He had seen that ring before. No, he had given that ring before. His breath caught in his throat as memories crashed over him like a tidal wave. A different time, a different world, a world where Olivia Carter wasn't a homeless woman sitting on the pavement, a world where she was his. "It can't be her," he whispered to himself. But deep down, he knew. He had to find out. "Pull over," he told his driver. The man hesitated. "Sir, this area," I said, "pull over." The car slowed, and Daniel didn't wait for it to come to a full stop before pushing the door open. The cold hit him instantly, seeping through his tailored coat, but he barely noticed. He stepped forward, and Olivia looked up. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Her tired, sunken eyes met his, recognition flashing like lightning between them. But unlike him, there was no shock, only fear. "Olivia?" His voice was barely above a whisper. She stiffened, her grip tightening around the children, as if preparing to run. Daniel took a hesitant step closer, but she flinched. "Stay away," she said, her voice hoarse, raw. Daniel's stomach twisted. This wasn't how he had imagined seeing her again, if he had ever imagined it at all. "Olivia, it's me, I know who you are," she interrupted, her tone sharp, defensive. "And I don't need your pity." The words hit him like a slap. Pity? Did she really think that's why he was standing here? Before he could respond, Mia stirred in Olivia's arms, blinking up at him with sleepy confusion. And just like that, everything changed. Because when Daniel looked into the little girl's eyes that mirrored his own, he felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He had always been good at recognizing patterns, analyzing details, putting pieces together, and the piece that had just fallen into place shook him to his core. His gaze snapped back to Olivia, his mind racing. Oh my God! The blood drained from his face. They're mine, aren't they? Olivia's lips parted, but no words came. The silence was deafening. And in that moment, Daniel Grant realized the past wasn't done with him. Not even close. The weight of his realization settled over him like a crushing tide. Daniel stood frozen, the freezing wind biting at his skin, yet he felt none of it. His heartbeat roared in his ears as his gaze darted between Olivia and the two children huddled against her. The little girl, Mia. Her wide eyes bore into his soul, an eerie reflection of his own from years past. And the boy, Lucas, though his small face was pale and exhausted, Daniel saw traces of himself in the sharp angles of his jaw, the way his brows knit together as he coughed weakly. There was no denying it. They were his. Olivia. Daniel's voice cracked as he took another step forward, but she immediately recoiled, pressing her back against the cold brick wall behind her. Her arms wrapped protectively around the children, as if shielding them from him. You stay away from us, she hissed, her voice laced with something between anger and terror. Daniel's mind raced, 1,000 questions fighting to be spoken. How? Why? Where had she been all these years? How had she ended up here, alone, with two children, his children, freezing on the streets? He needed answers. But more than that, he needed to understand how he had let this happen, without ever knowing. Olivia, please, he tried again, lowering his voice, trying to steady himself. Just talk to me. But Olivia shook her head, her lips trembling, not just from the cold, but from the raw, unfiltered emotions swirling inside her. You don't get to show up now and act like you care, Daniel, she spat, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Not after 10 years, not after everything. Daniel flinched. Her words cut deeper than he thought possible. He had imagined seeing Olivia again, 1,000,000 times in his mind, sometimes in passing, sometimes in moments of regret, but never like this, never in a situation where she looked at him as if he were a stranger who had failed her. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Lucas let out another harsh cough. His small body convulsed in Olivia's arms, and she immediately shifted, cupping his face with worry. Lucas, baby, breathe, she whispered desperately, rubbing his back as his tiny frame shuddered. That was it. Daniel wasn't going to stand there and argue when a child, his child, was sick and freezing. Whatever Olivia thought of him, whatever she believed about the past, none of it mattered right now. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his phone. Daniel, don't, Olivia warned, but he ignored her. Charles, he spoke firmly into the phone the moment his driver picked up. Turn the car around. Now. Olivia's eyes widened with panic. No, we don't need your help. But Daniel wasn't listening. Get the heat turned up inside the car. Have the staff prepare the guest house. We need blankets, medicine, food, everything. Understood, sir, Charles replied, already making the U-turn. Daniel ended the call, slipping his phone back into his pocket before kneeling in front of Olivia. He softened his tone, forcing his emotions down to focus on the immediate problem. Olivia, I know you don't trust me, but your son is sick. You don't have to come with me, but let me help him, please. Her grip tightened around Lucas, her eyes darting between Daniel and the car that was now pulling up. She was at war with herself. For years, she had learned not to trust anyone. Life had taught her that people only helped when it benefited them. And Daniel, He was part of the past she had fought so hard to survive without. But then Lucas let out another ragged breath, and Maya clung to her mother's sleeve, whimpering softly. Olivia closed her eyes, her resolve crumbling. "Fine," she whispered, "but this doesn't mean anything." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. Understood. He reached out carefully, lifting Lucas from her arms. The boy was lighter than he should have been, his body far too thin, far too fragile. And as Daniel carried him towards the warmth of the limousine, he couldn't ignore the rage burning inside him. Rage at himself, rage at the past, and rage at the fact that somehow he had let Olivia slip through his fingers, along with the family he never knew he had. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air of the small apartment as Daniel sat at the kitchen counter, flipping through notes for his upcoming business lecture. Olivia stood across from him, her hair still damp from her morning shower, a mischievous smirk playing on her lips. "You know, for someone who claims to be the next big thing in finance, you still can't make a proper cup of coffee," she teased, taking a sip from her own mug. Daniel chuckled, reaching for her hand. "That's what I have you for." She rolled her eyes but didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers with his, squeezing gently. "You're going to do great, you know," she said, her voice softer now. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles. "I hope so. If I land this internship, it could change everything for us." Olivia's smile faltered, just for a second. "Yeah," she murmured, looking away. Daniel frowned. "Live?" She hesitated before shaking her head. "Nothing. Just don't forget about us, okay?" He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Never." He had meant it. But reality had other plans. The warmth inside the car was almost overwhelming after the bitter cold outside. Olivia sat stiffly in the leather seat, mice nestled against her, staring wide-eyed at the luxury surrounding them. Daniel cradled Lucas, who had drifted into an exhausted sleep, against his chest. He could feel the boy's weak breaths, his small fingers curling into the fabric of Daniel's coat. As the car pulled away from the street where he had found them, Daniel finally turned to Olivia. "Where have you been all this time?" he asked, his voice quiet. Olivia looked down at her lap, her hands clenched into fists. "Surviving," she said simply. Daniel's throat tightened. "Why didn't you ever reach out to you?" She cut him off, her eyes flashing. "And say what, Daniel? That I was pregnant? That your father made it very clear I was a mistake you couldn't afford?" Daniel's blood ran cold. "What did you just say?" Olivia let out a humorless laugh. "You didn't know, did you? That your father offered me money to disappear before you could ever find out?" A storm brewed inside Daniel, colder than the winter night outside. Everything he thought he knew about the past was unraveling. And it was only the beginning. The silence inside the limousine was thick with tension. The soft hum of the car's engine was the only sound filling the space as Daniel processed Olivia's words. His father, Charles Grant, had known. He had known about Olivia's pregnancy, about the twins, and instead of telling him, he had erased them from Daniel's life. His grip on the sleeping Lucas tightened ever so slightly. The boy stirred but didn't wake, too weak from the cold and exhaustion. Daniel forced himself to take a slow breath, to push back the white-hot rage simmering beneath his skin. "I never knew," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Olivia let out a humorless laugh, staring out the window. "Of course, you didn't. That's how men like your father operate. They make decisions for everyone else and expect you to fall in line." Daniel clenched his jaw, swallowing the bitterness and rising in his throat. He knew his father was a controlling man. But this was unforgivable. "You should have told me," he said, his voice laced with something raw. Olivia turned to him sharply, her eyes flashing. And risk him ruining my life even more. He made it clear that if I stayed, I'd never be free. So, I left. Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. The woman he had once loved, still loved, had been forced to disappear, to raise his children alone in a world that had given her nothing. He didn't know whether to feel anger, regret, or heartbreak. Perhaps all three. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, the only thing that mattered was getting them somewhere safe. Charles, how long? He asked, his voice steady. His driver, an older man who had worked for the Grant family for decades, responded immediately. 5 minutes, sir. Daniel nodded, glancing at Olivia. We'll get Lucas warm. Get him checked by a doctor. Then we'll talk. Olivia hesitated, then sighed. Fine. But I'm not staying any longer than necessary. Daniel didn't argue. He'd get them inside first. The rest could come later. A man sat in the dimly lit room, his fingers tapping against the chipped wooden table. His name was Ryan Parker, and he was staring at a crumpled photograph, one taken years ago. It was Olivia. His lips curled into a smirk as he took a sip from his beer. So, you finally crawled back to him, he muttered under his breath, tossing the photograph onto the table. He had been watching, tracking her movements ever since she reappeared in the city. He knew it was only a matter of time before she found her way back to Daniel Grant. And that complicated things, because Olivia still owed him. And Ryan Parker didn't like being owed. The car pulled into the long, winding driveway of Daniel's estate. Olivia had been expecting a luxurious home. But this was something else entirely. The mansion loomed ahead, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel. The sheer size of it made Olivia's stomach twist. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of the life Daniel had built without her. She turned to Mia, who clutched her hand tightly, eyes wide, as she took in the sight. Mommy, is this where we're staying? Olivia hesitated. Just for tonight, sweetheart. Charles opened the door for them, and Daniel stepped out first, still cradling Lucas against his chest. The little boy was barely awake, his body limp from exhaustion. Come on, Daniel said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Olivia took a breath and followed him inside. The warmth hit her immediately. The grand foyer was lit with a golden glow, and a fire crackled in the marble fireplace. Olivia felt out of place, her worn coat and ragged shoes a stark contrast to the pristine luxury around her. Sir, the guest wing is ready. A woman in a tailored uniform approached. Good. Daniel nodded. Call Dr. Emerson. Have him come immediately. The woman gave a sharp nod and hurried away. Daniel turned to Olivia. Lucas needs to be seen by a doctor. No arguments? She wanted to protest, to insist that she could take care of him. But when she looked at her son's pale face, she knew she couldn't afford pride. Fine, she murmured. Daniel carried Lucas upstairs, while Olivia took Mia's hand and followed. Every step she took deeper into the house made her feel like she was sinking further into dangerous territory, one she had spent years trying to avoid. Lucas was finally asleep, his breathing more stable after being checked by the doctor. Mia was curled up beside him, her tiny hands gripping her brother's sleeve, as if afraid he'd disappear. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at them. She should feel relief. They were warm, safe. But instead, her chest ached with the weight of the past. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She looked up to see Daniel leaning against the doorframe. You should get some rest, he said softly. She scoffed. Yeah, right. Like that's possible. Daniel hesitated, then stepped inside. You're safe here, Olivia. She let out a bitter laugh. Oh, safe? That's funny. Because the last time I thought I was safe, I ended up on the streets with 2 kids to feed. Daniel winced. I know, and I can't change what happened, but I can help now. Olivia shook her head. I don't need your help, Daniel. We don't need your help. Daniel crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. Lucas was unconscious when I found you. Mia was shivering so hard, she couldn't even speak. If I hadn't been there tonight, what would have happened? Olivia's breath hitched, her fingers gripping the fabric of her jeans. You don't understand, she whispered. Then help me understand. She looked up at him, searching his face for some sign that this was all a trick, some ploy to make himself feel better. But she didn't see pity. She saw something else, something real. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt the smallest sliver of doubt. What if, just this once, she didn't have to do it alone? Ryan scrolled through his phone, a slow smirk spreading across his face. His contact had just confirmed it. Olivia and the kids were at Daniel Grant's mansion. Well, well, he murmured, tossing his phone onto the table. This changed everything, because now Olivia had something to lose, and Ryan Parker was very, very good at taking things away. The moon hung low over the city, casting a silver glow over Daniel Grant's mansion. Inside, the air was thick with an unspoken tension. Olivia sat on the edge of the plush guest bed, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her children's chests as they slept. They looked so small, so fragile, yet for years they had endured more hardship than most would in a lifetime. She traced her fingers over Lucas's forehead, brushing back his damp curls. He was still weak from the cold, but at least now he was warm. Mia snuggled close beside him, her tiny arms wrapped around her brother, as if afraid he would disappear. A part of Olivia wanted to believe that this was a blessing, a temporary reprieve from the harshness of reality. But she had learned long ago that comfort was a fleeting illusion. And Daniel Grant, he was dangerous, not in the way men like Ryan Parker were, but in a different, more insidious way. He made her want to hope. A knock at the door startled her. She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You're still awake, he observed. She let out a quiet chuckle. You expected me to sleep? Daniel stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I thought you might be exhausted enough to try. Olivia shook her head. Exhausted? Sure. But sleep? Number that would require feeling safe. Daniel's jaw tightened. He walked over to the window, looking out over the vast estate. You are safe here, Olivia? She exhaled sharply. For now. Silence stretched between them. Then, Daniel turned to face her. I want to help. Olivia scoffed. Help? Daniel, you're a billionaire. You have no idea what it's like to live on the streets, to fight every day, just to keep your kids alive. You can't just throw money at this and make it go away. Daniel took a step closer. I don't want to throw money at it. I want to fix it. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze head on. Why now? Why after all these years? Daniel's voice was quieter this time. Because I didn't know. And now that I do, I can't just ignore it. Olivia bit her lip, torn between wanting to believe him and fearing that she couldn't. Before she could respond, the door swung open, and Charles Grant stormed in. The older man's presence was suffocating, his tailored suit pristine as always, his expression a mask of barely contained fury. What the hell is this, Daniel? Charles's voice was cold, sharp. You bring a homeless woman and 2 street kids into my house? Daniel's posture stiffened. They're not street kids. They're my children. Charles's face darkened. You don't even know that for sure. Olivia shot up from the bed, her eyes blazing. How dare you? Charles barely spared her a glance. Stay out of this. You're only here because my son has a misguided sense of guilt. But make no mistake, Olivia. He turned back to Daniel, his voice like ice. She is manipulating you. Daniel clenched his fists. You knew? Charles's expression remained impassive. Knew what? Daniel stepped forward, voice dangerously low. You knew about Olivia, about the twins. You kept it from me. A flicker of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps amusement, crossed Charles's face. You had a future to focus on, Daniel. And she was a distraction? Daniel's chest rose and fell, with controlled breaths. You had no right. Charles waved a dismissive hand. I had every right. You think love is more important than power, than legacy? That's why you're weak, Daniel. Daniel let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. Number. You're the weak one, Father. You think power is controlling people, but real strength is doing what's right. Charles's gaze flickered to Olivia, then back to his son. If you continue down this path, you will lose everything. Daniel didn't hesitate. Then, I'll lose everything. For the first time, Charles looked truly taken aback, but he recovered quickly. Very well, but don't come crawling back when she destroys you. With that, he turned on his heel and strode out of the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia looked at Daniel, searching his face. You didn't have to do that. Daniel exhaled slowly. Yes, I did. Hours passed before Olivia finally forced herself to lie down. The bed was softer than anything she had ever slept on. The warmth almost suffocating after so many nights in the cold. Just as she began to drift off, she felt a small hand reaching for hers. Mommy? Mia's voice was sleepy. Olivia turned to her daughter, brushing a hand over her hair. I'm here, baby. Are we staying here forever? Olivia's heart clenched. She forced a smile. No, sweetheart. Just for now. Mia's tiny fingers tightened around hers. I like it here. Lucas isn't coughing anymore. Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes, but she held them back. Go to sleep, my love, she whispered. Mia sighed contentedly and curled up beside her brother. And for the first time in years, Olivia let herself close her eyes without fear. Across the city, in the dark corners where people like Daniel Grant never ventured, Ryan Parker leaned against the hood of his car, lighting a cigarette. She's at his house, his contact confirmed. Ryan exhaled smoke, a smirk playing at his lips. Of course she is. The man beside him shifted uncomfortably. So, what now? Ryan crushed the cigarette beneath his boot. Now. We remind Olivia that she doesn't get to walk away from me. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. You can hide in his mansion all you want, but you and I both know you don't belong there. He hit send. And smile. The morning light filtered through the massive glass windows of Daniel Grant's mansion, casting long golden streaks across the marble floor. Olivia sat at the breakfast table, gripping the warm coffee mug between her trembling fingers. She still wasn't used to this. The luxury, the warmth, the safety. It felt foreign. Across from her, Daniel sat quietly, his fingers drumming against the table. There was something different in his gaze today. Something darker, more intense. He wasn't just looking at her. He was studying her, as if piecing together a puzzle he hadn't realized was broken. Tell me everything, he finally said. Olivia stiffened. She had known this moment was coming. Everything about what? She asked, her voice guarded. Daniel leaned forward. About the twins. About what happened after. After we lost touch. She swallowed hard. She didn't want to relive it. But if Daniel truly wanted to help, if he deserved to know the truth, then she couldn't keep running from it. She took a deep breath. It started the day you left. It had been raining that night, just like the night she saw Daniel again. Olivia had clutched her stomach, feeling the first signs of nausea, but she hadn't thought much of it. She had waited for Daniel to return, waited for a call, a message, something. But the days turned into weeks, and all she got was silence. Her father's fury had been merciless. You ruined your life for a boy who doesn't even care enough to look back. He had spat, his face red with anger. She had tried to defend Daniel. But how could she? He hadn't answered her calls. He had disappeared into his new world, leaving her behind in the wreckage. And then, when she found out she was pregnant, the world had caved in. Her father had given her a choice: terminate the pregnancy or leave. She had chosen to leave. She had been 19, alone, and pregnant with twins. The next few years had been a nightmare. Olivia had tried to stay afloat, taking whatever jobs she could, waitressing, cleaning, even sleeping in shelters when she couldn't afford rent. Every day was a battle to keep her children fed and safe. And Ryan had been the biggest mistake of her life. Yeah, I thought he was kind, Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, he was. He helped me when I was at my lowest, and I was desperate enough to believe that meant something. But he changed. Daniel's fingers curled into fists. Ryan is the father. Olivia shook her head. Number. He wanted to be. But when I refused to let him control me, things turned bad. Daniel's jaw tightened. Did he hurt you? She hesitated. Not in the way you think, she admitted. But he made sure I had nothing. He took my money. He made people afraid to hire me. He spread rumors until I was completely isolated. When I finally found the courage to leave, he made sure I had nowhere to go. Daniel's face darkened. He had seen Ryan Parker's name before, on business reports, in legal disputes, always towing the line between wealth and criminality. And now, Ryan had his sights set on Olivia. Daniel exhaled, forcing himself to remain calm. You should have come to me, Olivia. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. I did. But you weren't there. That was a knife to the heart. Daniel wasn't a man who acted impulsively. His empire had been built on calculated decisions, strategic moves. But this time he wasn't thinking as a businessman. He was thinking as a man who had let the woman he loved suffer for far too long. And that's how he found himself standing outside Ryan Parker's office. The building was nothing like Daniel's polished corporate headquarters. It was a rundown structure, with tinted windows and a faint stench of cigarette smoke clinging to the air. Ryan's office was on the top floor. Daniel didn't bother knocking. He pushed the door open, stepping inside with the controlled power of a man who was used to owning the room. Ryan looked up from behind his desk, an amused smirk curling at his lips. Well, well, he drawled. To what do I owe the honor, Mr. Grant? Daniel clenched his fists. Stay away from Olivia and the kids. Ryan leaned back, feigning mock surprise. Now that's interesting. Last I checked, Olivia and I have history. You, on the other hand, you walked away. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's over. She's under my protection now. Whatever leverage you think you have over her, it ends today. Ryan's smirk widened. You don't get it, do you? He stood, walking around the desk. Olivia might be in your fancy mansion now, but she doesn't belong there. She belongs in my world, where people like you don't get to play hero. Daniel took a step closer, voice deadly quiet. Try me. Ryan chuckled. Oh, I will. And when she runs back to me, crying that you ruined her life all over again, Don't say I didn't warn you. Daniel didn't take the bait. Instead, he turned and walked away. But Ryan wasn't finished. By the way, Ryan called after him, tell Olivia I said hello. And remind her that no matter where she runs, she'll always be mine. Daniel didn't look back. But as he walked out of that office, he made himself a silent promise. Ryan Parker had just made the biggest mistake of his life. That night, Daniel returned home, finding Olivia sitting in the nursery with Mia and Lucas. The twins had taken to sleeping in one of the guest rooms, and Olivia had spent the evening reading them bedtime stories. He leaned against the doorframe, watching the way Olivia's voice softened when she spoke to them. Ma looked up, eyes bright. Daniel, can you read the next one? Daniel hesitated. Me? Lucas nodded eagerly. You have a cool voice. Daniel chuckled, stepping forward and settling onto the floor beside them. Olivia handed him the book, their fingers brushing briefly. As he read, he realized something. This wasn't just about protecting them anymore. He was already falling for them, all of them, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The morning sun cast a soft golden hue over the Grant estate, filtering through the high-arched windows of the breakfast hall. The smell of fresh coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs filled the air as Daniel entered the room. At the far end of the long oak table, Olivia sat with Mia and Lucas, helping them navigate the unfamiliar cutlery. The children had never seen a dining table this big, nor had they ever eaten in a room that echoed with silence rather than the murmurs of a crowded shelter. Mia, always the braver one, picked up her fork and speared a piece of pancake. She brought it to her mouth hesitantly, her big brown eyes darting between Daniel and Olivia, as if waiting for permission. Lucas, on the other hand, merely stared at his plate, hands clenched in his lap. The night before had been overwhelming, and now, sitting in a place so grand, so different from what he knew, it was clear he was still unsure if they truly belonged here. Daniel noticed Lucas's hesitation. You don't like pancakes? He asked, keeping his voice light. Lucas shook his head quickly. No, I like them. He hesitated, lowering his gaze. I don't want to waste them. Daniel's chest tightened. He could see it. The deeply ingrained fear of hunger. The knowledge that every meal might be their last. He had spent years closing deals worth millions. But at this moment, all he wanted was to ease the fear in Lucas's eyes. You can eat as much as you want, Daniel reassured him. And if you don't like something, we can make something else. Lucas blinked at him, as if trying to process the idea that food could be abundant, that there would always be more. Olivia reached over, squeezing her son's hand gently. It's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to be afraid. Slowly, Lucas picked up his fork and took a bite. The way his shoulders relaxed ever so slightly told Daniel that it was a small step forward. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself doing something he never thought he would, taking 2 children to a toy store. It had been Olivia's idea. They need something that's just theirs, she had told him earlier. Something that doesn't feel like charity. And so, Daniel had instructed his driver to take them to one of the largest toy stores in the city. The moment they stepped inside, Mia and Lucas froze, their eyes widening at the towering shelves stacked with plush animals, action figures, and dollhouses. Wow, Mia whispered, gripping Olivia's hand. Lucas stayed close to his mother, hesitant. Are we really allowed to be here? Daniel frowned but kept his tone casual. Of course, you can pick out anything you want. Maya was the first to let go of her mother's hand and take a step forward. Slowly, she approached a display of stuffed animals, running her fingers over the soft fur of a golden retriever plushie. Do you like that one? Daniel asked. Maya nodded, but she didn't pick it up. It's too nice, she said softly. What if someone else wants it more? Daniel's heart clenched at her words. This little girl, barely 7 years old, had already been taught to believe that she didn't deserve nice things. He knelt beside her. Mua, listen to me. You don't have to worry about that anymore. If you like it, you can have it. She hesitated, glancing up at Olivia for confirmation. Olivia nodded encouragingly, and finally, Mia hugged the plushie to her chest, her small fingers clutching it tightly, as if afraid it might disappear. Lucas, on the other hand, wandered towards the puzzle section. His eyes scanned the shelves, and Daniel noticed the way his fingers twitched, as if he were trying to solve a problem in his head. You like puzzles? Daniel asked. Lucas gave a small nod. Yeah. I used to play with the ones at the shelter, but sometimes the pieces were missing. Daniel reached for a complex 3D puzzle set. How about this one? Lucas looked at the box, then at Daniel. Really? Daniel smiled. Really? Slowly, Lucas took the box from his hands, holding it close, as if it were something precious. As they left the store, Daniel's assistant, Sophia Evans, was waiting for them outside. Mr. Grant, she greeted with a polite nod, before her sharp blue eyes flickered toward Olivia. Sophia was striking, tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a navy blue pantsuit. She had been Daniel's assistant for years, one of the few people who understood how his mind worked. Olivia stiffened instinctively. She had dealt with women like Sophia before, the kind who looked at her and saw nothing but a problem. Daniel, oblivious to the tension, gestured toward her. Sophia, this is Olivia, and these are Mia and Lucas. Sophia gave Olivia a once-over, her gaze unreadable. I've heard a lot about you, she said smoothly. Olivia crossed her arms. I'm sure you have. Daniel, sensing the frostiness in the air, quickly changed the subject. Did you find anything on Ryan Parker? He asked, steering the conversation toward business. Sophia's expression turned serious. Nothing concrete yet, but I have some leads. We should talk privately. Olivia caught that. A conversation that she wasn't meant to be part of. She didn't like it. That night, after putting Mia and Lucas to bed, Olivia found a note slipped under her door. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it. You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late. The message was typed, no handwriting to trace. Her breath hitched as she looked around the dimly lit hallway. Someone had been inside the mansion. Her first instinct was to go to Daniel, but a bitter voice in her head told her this was exactly what people like Sophia expected, that Olivia would become a burden, a problem to be solved. She gripped the note tightly. She wouldn't let fear control her. Not anymore. The next morning, Olivia found Sophia waiting for her in the garden. I assume you got the note, Sophia said, her arms crossed. Olivia narrowed her eyes. Was it from you? Sophia scoffed. I don't waste my time with anonymous threats. Then why are you here? Sophia studied her for a moment. I'm here because Daniel trusts me, and I don't trust you. Olivia's fingers clenched into fists, but before she could respond, a new voice cut in. That's enough, Daniel said, as he stepped into the garden. Sophia looked at him, her expression unreadable. Daniel, I'm only trying to protect you. Daniel's voice was firm. Olivia doesn't need to prove anything to you. She stays. Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. I hope you're right, she murmured before walking away. Daniel turned to Olivia, his gaze softer now. Are you okay? She hesitated, then nodded. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Someone wanted her gone, and she had a feeling that whoever it was wouldn't stop at just a note. The early morning sunlight filtered through the heavy drapes of the Grant estate, casting long shadows across the pristine marble floors. The warmth of the rising sun should have brought a sense of comfort, but for Olivia, it did the opposite. She stood by the window, the crumpled note still clenched in her hand. The words burned into her mind. "You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late." A deep breath did little to calm the unease crawling beneath her skin. Someone had been inside the mansion, close enough to slip the note under her door without being seen. And that meant one thing. Whoever it was, they were watching. The past had a way of creeping back in, and Olivia knew that better than anyone. Downstairs, Daniel was on the phone with his security team. "I don't care how much it costs. I want round-the-clock surveillance on the entire estate," he ordered, pacing the length of his study. "Check the security footage from last night. Find out how someone got in." Sophia stood nearby, arms crossed. "This wouldn't have happened if you had just listened to me." Daniel shot her a sharp look. "If you're about to tell me again that Olivia is a liability, don't." Sophia sighed, rubbing her temple. "Daniel, I just think you need to be careful. You're making emotional decisions, and emotions make people vulnerable." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I'm not letting anything happen to her, or the kids." Sophia hesitated before responding. "Then you need to know something. I've been looking into Ryan Parker." Daniel's entire posture stiffened at the name. "And he's back in town." The words landed like a punch to the gut. "Are you sure?" Daniel's voice was tight. Sophia nodded. "He was seen near a private club downtown 2 nights ago. And get this, he's hired a lawyer. A good one." Daniel's fingers curled into a fist. He didn't need Sophia to say what they were both thinking. Ryan Parker wasn't just back. He was here for something. And Daniel had a sinking feeling. He knew exactly what that was. Later that afternoon, Olivia took Mia and Lucas to school. It was supposed to be a simple trip. Drop them off, reassure them everything was normal, and leave. But as she walked back to her car, a presence stopped her in her tracks. A tall figure leaned against a black SUV across the street, his arms folded over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. Ryan Parker. The sight of him sent ice down her spine. It had been years since she last saw him, but time had only sharpened his cruel features, the same piercing blue eyes, the same arrogant stance, as if he still owned the world. She gripped her car keys tighter and forced herself to keep walking. But Ryan stepped forward. Not even a hello. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Stay away from me," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Ryan chuckled. "That's not very friendly, Leave. After all, we have unfinished business." Olivia clenched her jaw. "There is no we. Whatever this is, it's over." Ryan took another step closer. "You don't get to decide that. Those kids," he paused, tilting his head, his smirk deepening. "They're mine too." Her blood ran cold. "No," she whispered. "You lost that right a long time ago." Ryan smiled. "We'll see about that." And with that, he turned, got into his SUV, and drove off, leaving Olivia standing there, shaken to her core. By the time Olivia got back to the estate, she was trembling. Daniel was in the middle of a business call when she stormed into his office. "He was at the school," she blurted out. Daniel's entire body went rigid. "Who?" "Ryan." Silence. Then, in one swift motion, Daniel ended the call and stood, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. "He approached you?" His voice was low, dangerous. Olivia nodded. "He said he's not done with me, that he—" She swallowed hard. "That the kids are his too." Daniel slammed his fist on the desk, making Olivia jump. "That bastard," he hissed. He thinks he can just walk back into your life and claim them? He's hired a lawyer, Olivia added, her voice almost breaking. He's going to try and take them, Daniel. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to control the rage burning through him. Like hell he is. He grabbed his phone. We're handling this right now. That evening, Daniel's legal team assembled at the estate. The lead attorney, James Connolly, flipped through a thick file. If Ryan Parker wants to file for parental rights, he'll have to prove he's fit. Given his history, we can challenge him in court. But he's smart, Olivia said. He'll twist the story. He'll paint me as the unfit one. Daniel exhaled sharply. Then we'll fight harder. James nodded. We'll gather character witnesses, school records, anything that proves the kids are better off with you. Olivia clenched her hands together. And if that's not enough? Daniel met her gaze, his voice unwavering. Then we'll find something that is. At midnight, the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. Daniel bolted upright in bed, instincts kicking in immediately. He reached for the gun in his bedside drawer and moved swiftly down the hall. The security system's alarm hadn't gone off, meaning whoever was inside had disabled it. His mind raced. Mia and Lucas. He reached their room and found Olivia already there, holding the kids close, her eyes wide with fear. It's Ryan, she whispered. I know it. Daniel nodded. Stay here. Lock the door. He stepped out into the hallway, gripping the gun tighter as he moved toward the stairs. A shadow flickered in the dim light. And then, a voice. Easy there, Grant. Daniel's blood ran hot as Ryan Parker stepped into view, a sick grin on his face. You're trespassing, Daniel said coldly. Get the hell out. Ryan shrugged. Just came to say hello. Daniel raised the gun. I won't ask again. Ryan chuckled, but there was no amusement in his eyes. See you in court, Daniel. And with that, he turned and disappeared into the night. Daniel's hands shook with fury as he lowered the gun. This wasn't over. Ryan had declared war, and Daniel had no intention of losing. The morning air was thick with tension as Daniel stood by the window of his study, gripping a steaming cup of coffee. The events of last night played on a loop in his mind. The break-in, the confrontation, Ryan's smug smirk as he disappeared into the darkness. The bastard had nerve. But if Ryan thought he could walk into their lives and take Mia and Lucas, he was sorely mistaken. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Olivia standing in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The exhaustion on her face was evident, dark circles under her eyes, betraying the sleepless night they had all endured. He's not going to stop, is he? She murmured. Daniel shook his head. Number. But neither are we. By midday, the headlines had already hit every major news outlet. Millionaire caught in custody battle with homeless woman who will win. Mother of two, or gold digger. The truth about Olivia Reynolds. The articles were brutal, twisting every detail of Olivia's past to paint her as an unfit mother who had conveniently reappeared in Daniel's life, just as he was, at the peak of his wealth. They dragged up old financial struggles, fabricated rumors of past substance abuse, and even questioned whether Mia and Lucas were really Ryan's children. Daniel tossed his phone onto the desk in frustration. They're tearing her apart. Sophia, standing nearby, exhaled sharply. That's exactly what Ryan wants. He's setting the stage. If the public sees Olivia as unstable, it strengthens his case in court. Olivia sat stiffly, clutching the armrests of her chair. I should have seen this coming, she whispered. Daniel crouched beside her. Hey, he said gently. We'll fight this. We'll expose him for what he is. Her eyes met his, filled with quiet determination. Then let's do it. That afternoon, the legal team gathered at the estate. James Connolly, Daniel's lead attorney, laid out the strategy. Ryan's case hinges on two things: public perception and legal technicalities. If he can convince the court that Olivia is an unfit mother, he might win joint custody. That can't happen, Daniel said firmly. James nodded. Then we need to hit him where it hurts: his criminal past, his financial instability, any past incidents of abuse. Do we have anything solid? Sophia leaned forward. I've been digging. Ryan was arrested 3 years ago for assault, but the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. James frowned. That won't hold up in court. We need more. I'll find more, Daniel said, his jaw set. Olivia's voice was quiet but strong. What if I testify? James hesitated. You could, but it's risky. Ryan's lawyer will try to discredit you, twist your words. Olivia took a deep breath. Then let him try. I won't let him take my children. The first hearing took place a week later. The courtroom was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing as Daniel and Olivia entered together, hands firmly intertwined. Across the room, Ryan sat with his lawyer, a smug expression plastered across his face. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, tapped her gavel. Let's begin. Ryan's lawyer was the first to speak. Your Honor, my client is simply a father who wants to be part of his children's lives. The mother in question has a history of financial instability, homelessness, and questionable decision-making. We believe the children deserve a stable home with their biological father. James rose. Objection, Your Honor. This is a blatant mischaracterization of Miss Reynolds. She has been the sole provider for these children, despite overwhelming hardships. Mr. Parker, on the other hand, has no history of involvement in their lives until now. Ryan's lawyer smirked. People change. Daniel clenched his fists under the table. He wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug look off Ryan's face. The moment Mia and Lucas were called to the stand, Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Lucas, clutching Mia's hand, looked tiny in the oversized witness chair. The judge smiled kindly. Sweetheart, do you know why you're here today? Lucas nodded shyly. To talk about Mommy and Daddy. Ryan's lawyer stepped forward. And you love your mommy very much, don't you? Lucas beamed. She's the best. And do you remember your daddy? Lucas hesitated. I don't know him. Ryan's lawyer turned to Mia. And you, Mia? Do you want to live with your father? Mia stiffened. I don't even know him, she said, voice quivering. He never came to find us before? Olivia's heart ached. Ryan's lawyer pressed. But if you got to know him, would you want to? Mia's lip trembled, and she clung to Lucas's hand. We don't need a new dad. We have Mommy. And we have Daniel. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Ryan's lawyer's expression darkened. When Ryan took the stand, Daniel already knew it would be a show. Ryan straightened his tie, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. Your Honor, I made mistakes, but I want to make things right. I deserve a chance. James rose. Mr. Parker, how many times have you seen your children in the past 7 years? Ryan hesitated. Well, circumstances. How many? James pressed. Ryan clenched his jaw. None. Exactly. James turned to the judge. This man had 7 years to step up. He chose not to. Ryan's smirk faltered. James continued. Let's talk about your criminal record. Ryan's lawyer interrupted. Objection. Sustained, the judge said. Stick to the case at hand, Mr. Connolly. Ryan leaned back, smug once more. Daniel saw red. Before he could stop himself, he shot up. You don't care about them, he spat. You just want to win. Ryan turned, grinning. Touched a nerve, Grant. The judge banged the gavel. Mr. Grant, control yourself. Daniel forced himself to sit. But the damage was done. Ryan's lawyer smirked. Your Honor, this outburst proves what I've been saying. Daniel Grant is emotionally unstable. Do we really want someone like that influencing these children? Daniel's fists clenched. He had played right into Ryan's hands. After the hearing, Olivia pulled Daniel aside. We can't let him win, she whispered. Daniel took a shaky breath. I won't let him. That night, Sophia called. I found something, she said, excitement in her voice. Daniel gripped the phone. What is it? Ryan has a history of abuse, not just against Olivia, against other women. And I have proof. Daniel exhaled. This wasn't over. They had one last card to play. And they were going to win. The courtroom's heavy wooden doors shut behind them, with a finality that sent chills down Olivia's spine. She clutched Mia and Lucas's hands, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Daniel walked beside her, his jaw tight, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Outside, reporters swarmed like vultures. Microphones were shoved toward them. Cameras flashed in blinding bursts. Ms. Reynolds, are you worried about losing custody? Mr. Grant, do you believe Ryan Parker has a legitimate claim to the children? Some sources say this is a ploy to extort money. What do you say to that? Daniel turned, eyes flashing. This is about protecting two innocent children, not money. We'll fight with everything we have. Olivia tugged his sleeve. Let's go. The kids. Mia hid her face against Olivia's coat, and Lucas buried his head in Daniel's side. That was enough. Daniel pushed forward, shielding them from the chaos. As they slid into the black town car, Olivia exhaled shakily. They're painting me as the villain. Daniel's voice was firm. Then we'll change the narrative. 2 days later, they received the first ruling. Shared custody hearing scheduled for review. Olivia's heart dropped. They're giving him a chance, she murmured. James Connolly set down the papers. It's not a final decision. The court wants to evaluate both sides before making a permanent ruling. Evaluate? Daniel repeated, incredulous. What's there to evaluate? He abandoned them. James nodded grimly. Ryan's lawyer is arguing that he's trying to turn his life around, and that denying him access would be unjust. Daniel swore under his breath. Olivia sat motionless, staring at the document in her hands. A hearing. That meant more battles, more exposure, more time for Ryan to manipulate the system. We need to hit him first, Sophia said, stepping forward. I found something. Daniel's attention snapped to her. Tell me. Sophia pulled out a file. Ryan was involved in a domestic dispute 2 years ago. A woman filed a report claiming he hit her, but the case never went to trial. He paid her off. Daniel's hands tightened into fists. Can we use this? James hesitated. It's tricky. The case was dismissed. We need solid proof. Sophia smirked. That's why I tracked the woman down. That evening, Daniel and Sophia met with Lena Matthews, the woman Ryan had abused. She sat across from them in a dimly lit coffee shop, her hands trembling around a cup of tea. I was young and stupid, she admitted. He was charming at first. But then, he changed. Daniel leaned forward. Tell us what happened. Lena hesitated, glancing around as if expecting Ryan to appear. It started with yelling. Then the first slap. The apologies, the promises. Her voice wavered. Then, it got worse. Daniel's stomach twisted. Sophia placed a hand on Lena's. If you testify, we can stop him. Lena laughed bitterly. And what if he comes after me? Daniel's voice was steely. He won't. She searched his eyes. Finally, she nodded. I'll do it. The next morning, the headlines took a darker turn. Daniel Grant's millionaire influence. Buying the court. Olivia Reynolds. Unstable, unfit, unworthy. A clip of Daniel's courtroom outburst, played repeatedly, painting him as reckless and volatile. Sophia slammed her laptop shut. They're twisting everything. Daniel exhaled sharply. We need to go public. Show the truth. That night, Daniel and Olivia sat for an exclusive interview. Facing the cameras, Daniel spoke firmly. This isn't about wealth. This is about justice. Ryan Parker is not a father. He's a threat. Olivia's voice was quiet but strong. I raised Mia and Lucas alone. I fought to keep them safe. I won't stop now. The interview aired nationwide. The response was immediate. Public opinion began shifting in their favor. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the next hearing began. Ryan sat smugly beside his lawyer, oozing confidence. Olivia felt nausea rise in her throat. The judge entered. Court is now in session. Ryan's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client only seeks a chance to know his children. James countered. Mr. Parker has a history of violence. We have a witness. Ryan stiffened. Lena Matthews was called to the stand. As she took a deep breath and began to testify, Ryan's expression darkened. She spoke clearly. He hit me. He threatened me. He paid me to stay silent. Ryan's lawyer objected. Irrelevant. The judge disagreed. Overruled. Continue, Miss Matthews. Lena met Ryan's glare head-on. He's not a good man. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. Ryan's composure cracked. James presented further evidence. Ryan's financial instability, the unpaid child support cases, the restraining order a previous ex had filed. Ryan's face turned red. James delivered the final blow. This is the man trying to claim custody. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. As they left the courthouse, Daniel sensed something was wrong. A security guard rushed toward them. Sir, you need to see this. He led them to a television in the hallway. A news anchor reported, breaking news. Anonymous sources reveal shocking details about Olivia Reynolds' past. The screen flashed images of fake police reports, fabricated debts, and edited footage, making Olivia look like an unfit mother. Olivia's face drained of color. No, that's not real. Ryan had struck back. Daniel turned, eyes burning with rage. This isn't over, he growled. Back at the estate, the team gathered. Sophia, pale, held up her laptop. Ryan's lawyer planted fake evidence, but I can prove it. James nodded. If we expose this, the judge will have no choice but to discredit him. Daniel clenched his fists. Then let's do it. The next day, they held a press conference. Sophia presented irrefutable proof that Ryan had orchestrated a smear campaign. Reporters gasped as she played recorded calls, showing his lawyer bribing people to fabricate evidence. Ryan's face was plastered across every screen. Public opinion flipped. The court ordered an immediate review of the case. And just like that, Ryan's power began to crumble. That night, Olivia tucked Mia and Lucas into bed. As she kissed their foreheads, relief washed over her. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Until she heard a noise. A shadow moved outside the window. Olivia's blood ran cold. Ryan wasn't finished. And this time, he was desperate. The mansion was silent. Too silent. Olivia stood frozen in the dim hallway outside Mia and Lucas's bedroom, her pulse thundering in her ears. The shadow had disappeared from the window, but the unease in her chest refused to fade. Daniel appeared beside her within seconds. What is it? His voice was low, urgent. She swallowed hard. I saw something outside. Someone. His jaw tightened. Take the kids. Go to the safe room. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before rushing into the bedroom. Mia and Lucas were fast asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling peacefully. She gently scooped Lucas into her arms while nudging Mia awake. "Mommy," Mia murmured groggily. "We're going somewhere safe, baby," Olivia whispered, brushing a hand through her daughter's curls. "Come with me." She carried them both down the hall, heart pounding. Daniel walked ahead, scanning every shadow. Just as they reached the hidden panel leading to the estate's panic room, a crash echoed from downstairs, glass shattering. Olivia gasped, clutching the twins tighter. Daniel turned, locking eyes with her. "Go! Now!" She disappeared behind the reinforced door, locking it just as hurried footsteps echoed up the staircase. And then, a gunshot. Daniel barely had time to react before the front door swung open with brute force. Ryan stood there, breathing heavily, gun in hand. His eyes were wild, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Where are they?" he snarled. Daniel didn't flinch. "You have 5 seconds to leave before I put a bullet in you myself." Ryan chuckled darkly. "Big talk, millionaire." He took a step closer, lifting the gun. "I'm here for my kids." Daniel's muscles coiled. His mind raced. "Stall. Keep him talking. Buy time." "They're not yours," Daniel said coldly. "You lost that awat when you abandoned them." Ryan smirked. "And yet here I am. And the law says I have a shot." Daniel took a slow step forward. "The law also says breaking and entering is a crime. You're already finished, Ryan. Walk away." Ryan's smirk faltered. For a split second, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then, the wail of police sirens filled the air. "Sophia!" She had called the cops. Ryan's face twisted in rage. "This isn't over," he spat, whirling around just as the front door burst open. The SWAT team stormed in, weapons raised. "Drop the gun." For a second, Ryan hesitated. Then, he lunged. A deafening bang rang through the mansion. Ryan collapsed to the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder, screaming in pain. Daniel exhaled sharply as officers swarmed the intruder, slamming cuffs onto his wrists. It was over, or so they thought. Hours later, Olivia still hadn't let go of the twins. They sat in the safe room, Mies curled up in her lap, Lucas asleep on Daniel's chest. James paced the room, his phone buzzing with calls from reporters. "The media is running wild with this," he muttered. "Ryan's lawyer is already claiming excessive force." Daniel snorted. "Of course he is. But we have security footage. It'll hold up in court." Sophia folded her arms. "Even with Ryan behind bars, his influence isn't gone. Someone funded his legal team. Someone with power." Olivia looked up sharply. "Who?" Sophia hesitated. Then she turned her laptop around. A familiar name flashed across the screen. Charles Grant. Daniel went still. "No." Sophia nodded. "Your father was bankrolling Ryan's case, and he's been feeding stories to the press." Silence fell over the room. Then Daniel exhaled a slow, deadly breath. "Then, it's time I pay my father a visit." The next morning, Daniel stepped into Grant Enterprises. Every employee in the gleaming skyscraper froze as he marched toward the executive office. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open. Charles Grant looked up, startled, but only for a second. Then he sighed, setting down his glass of whiskey. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Charles murmured. Daniel's fists clenched. "You funded Ryan." Charles tilted his head. "You left me no choice, Isana. You threw away everything for that woman." Daniel's voice dropped into a deadly whisper. "That woman is the mother of my children." Charles's lips curled. "They're not even your blood." Daniel's world exploded. He lunged forward, slamming both hands onto the desk. Papers scattered. The glass of whiskey shattered. "They are my family," Daniel snarled. For the first time, Charles looked shaken. Daniel straightened, voice cold. "I'm done. With you. With this company. With everything." Charles chuckled dryly. "You're walking away from billions." Daniel smiled. "Good." Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Daniel left the office feeling free. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to lose. But he had everything to fight for. That night, Olivia found him sitting in the nursery, watching Mia and Lucas sleep. "You did it," she whispered. "You cut him off." Daniel looked up at her, eyes soft. "I had to." She knelt beside him, brushing a hand through his hair. "Are you okay?" He exhaled. "I am now." For the first time, Daniel felt whole. But just as Olivia leaned in, just as their lips were about to meet, Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Daniel frowned, unlocking it. The message was only 2 words. He escaped. Daniel's blood ran cold. Ryan Parker was gone. The phone slipped from Daniel's fingers. His heart pounded like a war drum in his chest as he reread the text. He escaped. The words seared into his brain, an alarm louder than any siren. Olivia, sensing the shift in his demeanor, placed a hand on his arm. "What is it?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Ryan. He's gone." Silence. Then Olivia bolted upright. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "He was in custody." Daniel grabbed his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. His security team had already sent him an alert. A prison transfer gone wrong. A security breach. Ryan Parker was missing, and no one knew where he was. "We have to leave," Olivia whispered, gripping his arm. Her eyes were wide, panicked. "We have to get Mia and Lucas somewhere safe. Now." Daniel stood, grabbing his phone. "James," he barked, "activate lockdown protocol. I want security doubled at every entrance. No one gets in or out without my say-so." James's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "Already on it." "But Daniel, there's more. You need to see this." A moment later, a video file popped up in Daniel's inbox. He pressed play. The screen flickered to life. Ryan, standing in front of a dark alley, illuminated by the sickly yellow glow of a street lamp. His face was bruised, but his eyes burned with something far more dangerous than pain. Hate. And then he spoke. "Daniel Grant." Ryan sneered, voice hoarse but dripping with venom. "You think you've won. You think you can take my kids, my life, and walk away." A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. Ryan chuckled. "I have nothing left to lose. And you? You have everything." The screen cut to Mia and Lucas, not in real time, just a photo, but a recent one. From that morning. Olivia gasped. Ryan's voice continued, lower now. "Deadly. You took my children. Now I take something from you." The video ended. Silence. Daniel's grip on his phone was so tight, his knuckles turned white. "This isn't over," he muttered. "He's coming back." Olivia exhaled shakily, holding Mia and Lucas even closer. "Oh, then we stop him. For good." Daniel wasted no time. By sunrise, his estate was locked down tighter than a fortress. Armed security patrolled the perimeter. Cameras were installed on every blind spot, and James was working around the clock, tracking Ryan's movements. But Daniel knew one thing: Ryan wouldn't be found. Ryan would find them. And when he did, Daniel needed to be ready. The next evening, Daniel stepped into his father's office. Charles Grant barely looked up. "I was expecting you." Daniel didn't waste time. "Where is he?" Charles swirled his whiskey, unfazed. "Where is who?" "Don't play games," Daniel growled. "You funded his legal team. You were backing him from the start. Where is he?" Charles exhaled, setting his glass down. You've always been emotional, Daniel. Daniel slammed his fists onto the desk. Don't deflect. Ryan Parker is on the loose, threatening my family and you. He pointed a shaking finger at his father. You have something to do with it. A long silence. Then Charles leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Do you love her? Daniel blinked. What? The woman, Charles said calmly. The kids. Do you love them? Daniel clenched his jaw. They're my family. Charles studied him. Then, walk away. Silence stretched between them. You're bluffing, Daniel said finally. Charles gave a slow, knowing smile. Am I? Daniel's pulse pounded. His father wasn't outright admitting it. But the warning was clear. If Daniel stayed with Olivia, if he kept fighting this battle, he was on his own. No inheritance, no protection, no power. But Daniel already knew his answer. Without another word, he stood. His father sighed. You're making a mistake. Daniel glanced back. The only mistake I ever made was listening to you. Then he walked out. For good. That night, Olivia found Daniel staring out at the city skyline. You did it, she murmured. Daniel turned to her, searching her face. I don't care about the money, or the company, or my father. I just want you. I want us. Her breath hitched. Before she could say another word, Daniel pulled her in. Their lips met, desperate, consuming. A promise. For the first time in years, Daniel Grant had nothing to lose, and for the first time ever, he had everything to fight for. A week later, the court ruled in Olivia's favor. Ryan Parker lost all parental rights, but he was still out there. And Daniel knew this wasn't over. As he watched Mia and Lucas run across the yard, their laughter filling the air, Daniel vowed one thing. He would never let Ryan touch them again, even if it meant finishing this war himself. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Daniel's penthouse, casting golden streaks across the marble floor. The air was still, yet heavy with unspoken words. Daniel stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring down at the city below. Olivia watched him from the kitchen, her fingers wrapped around a warm coffee mug. She knew that look, the same one he had, whenever he was lost in thought, calculating his next move. But this time, it wasn't about business. It was about them. And the future. She took a deep breath and walked over. You're quiet, she murmured. Daniel turned, offering a small smile. Just thinking. Olivia set her mug on the counter. About? He hesitated. Then softly he said, everything. Over the past week, Olivia had been working closely with a nonprofit organization that helped single mothers transition from shelters to stable homes. After everything she'd been through, she wanted to give back, to help women who were just like her, struggling but still fighting. The organization, Hope Bridge, had recently opened a new community center, and they'd offered Olivia a position as a caseworker. It wasn't just a job. It was a purpose, a way to turn her pain into something meaningful. But there was one problem. It meant stepping into the public eye. And after the media storm surrounding her court case, Olivia wasn't sure if she was ready for that. I got the job, she finally said, breaking the silence. Daniel blinked. That's incredible. But, she bit her lip. They want me to do interviews, share my story, show other women that it's possible to rebuild their lives. Daniel nodded, waiting. Olivia exhaled. I don't know if I can. The press, she swallowed. They tore me apart. And now, they'll be watching my every move. Daniel stepped forward, tilting her chin up, so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, he said gently. But, Olivia, your story matters. You could help so many people. A long pause. Then she whispered, "What if they come after me again? What if Ryan?" Daniel's jaw tensed at the mention of Ryan. He hadn't been seen since his escape. No word, no sightings. It was as if he'd vanished. But Daniel knew better. Ryan was out there, waiting, watching. And that was why Daniel had doubled their security, ensuring that Olivia and the twins were never alone. "You're safe," he assured her. "Nothing'll hurt you again." She searched his face. "How can you be so sure?" Daniel's gaze darkened. "Because I won't let them." And there was something in his voice, something unshakable, that made her believe him. Later that evening, Daniel surprised Olivia with a date night. He recreated their first date, the one from 10 years ago. The rooftop garden, the candlelit dinner, the soft jazz playing in the background. Olivia gasped when she saw it. "Daniel, this is—" He grinned. "Perfect?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Nostalgic." They sat down, clinking their wine glasses together. For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to just breathe, to enjoy a moment that wasn't overshadowed by threats or legal battles. "I missed this," Olivia admitted. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand. "Me too." As the night went on, their laughter echoed under the city lights. For a brief, beautiful moment, everything felt right. But then, Daniel's phone buzzed. His body stiffened. Olivia noticed immediately. "What is it?" He glanced at the screen. A message from James. "We found him." Daniel's blood ran cold. Ryan Parker was back. And this time, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about war. The night air was thick with tension. Olivia sat frozen in her chair, her fingers clenched around the delicate stem of her wine glass. Across from her, Daniel's expression had shifted from relaxed joy to hardened determination. The name on the screen, Ryan Parker, hung between them like a shadow, dark and looming. "He's back," Olivia whispered. Daniel's grip on his phone tightened. "Yes!" A sharp exhale. The warmth of the rooftop garden, the gentle hum of jazz in the background, all of it faded. She could feel the past creeping up, threatening to pull her under again. "What? What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel lifted his gaze to hers, his steel blue eyes carrying a promise. "It means I end this for good." The next morning, Daniel wasted no time. He called in James, his head of security, and Sophia Evans, his trusted assistant, to discuss their next move. "We tracked Parker to a motel outside of town," James reported. "He's using an alias, but we have confirmation it's him." Sophia frowned. "What is he doing back here?" James hesitated. "We don't know yet, but given his past, it's safe to assume it's not good." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration simmering beneath the surface. He should have seen this coming. Ryan was too much of a narcissist to stay hidden forever. "We need to get ahead of him," Daniel said firmly. "If he's planning something, I want to know what it is." Olivia, who had been listening from the kitchen, wrapped her arms around herself. "What if this isn't just about revenge?" she murmured. 3 sets of eyes turned to her. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. Olivia swallowed. "Ryan. He never lets go. If he's here, it's because he thinks he still has a claim to something." Silence. And then it clicked. The twins. Daniel's expression darkened. "Over my dead body." That night, Daniel drove Olivia and the kids out of the city. He didn't tell her where they were going, only that it was somewhere safe. Mia and Lucas, exhausted from the long day, had fallen asleep in the back seat. Olivia sat in the front, staring at Daniel's profile as he drove. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too hard. "Talk to me," she said softly. He sighed. "I don't want you or the kids anywhere near him." "I know," she whispered. He pulled off the highway, taking a winding road up to a private estate, a place she didn't recognize. The car slowed, rolling up a long driveway lined with fairy lights. Olivia frowned. "Where are we?" Daniel parked and turned to face her. His gaze was softer now, but determined. "Somewhere that's ours." She blinked. "Ours?" He got out, walking to the passenger side to open her door. "Come on." She followed him, stepping onto the porch of what looked like a beautiful country home. The front door was already open, the inside glowing with soft candlelight. Her breath caught. There, in the middle of the living room, was a small table with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. The air smelled of fresh roses and vanilla. A fireplace crackled in the corner. "Daniel," she started, but the words caught in her throat, because he was already lowering himself onto one knee. Her heart stopped. He pulled out a small velvet box, flipping it open to reveal a stunning diamond ring. His eyes never left hers. "I was going to wait," he admitted. "Do it properly. Something grand. But after today, I realized I don't want to wait anymore." She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes shining with tears. "I want you safe, Dion. I want the kids safe. But more than that, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm yours, and you're mine." A shaky breath. "Marry me, Olivia." For a moment, everything else disappeared. Ryan, the threats, the past. It was just them. Mua and Lucas, who had woken up, peeked around the corner. "Mommy, say yes," Lucas whispered loudly. Olivia let out a teary laugh, glancing at them before looking back at Daniel, the man who had never given up on her. "Yes," she whispered. Daniel smiled. Then, as if he couldn't wait a second longer, he kissed her, deeply, passionately, completely. Mia and Lucas cheered, and just like that they were a family. The morning after Olivia's acceptance of Daniel's proposal, the world seemed brighter. But underneath the joy, a storm still loomed. Ryan Parker wasn't gone. He was lurking, waiting for his next move, and Daniel wasn't going to let that happen. He had a plan. Daniel's father, Charles Grant, had made his disapproval of Olivia clear from the start. But now Daniel's fight wasn't just about family. It was about justice. Charles stormed into Daniel's office, his expression like a thundercloud. "You're really going through with this?" he demanded. Daniel didn't look up from his desk. "If by this you mean marrying Olivia and protecting my future wife and kids, then yes," Charles scoffed. "You're throwing away your legacy for a woman with a scandalous past." Daniel's gaze hardened. "Her past isn't scandalous. It's tragic. And if you can't see the difference, that's your problem." Charles folded his arms. "And what about Ryan Parker? He's stirring the media. He's telling them you stole his children." Daniel clenched his jaw. He lost his right to call them his children the day he abandoned them. Charles sighed. "And yet, the press is eating it up." Daniel knew his father was right. The battle wasn't just in court anymore. It was in the public eye. Ryan had money, connections, and now, a narrative. Daniel needed to change the story. The first hit came 2 days later. A breaking news report flashed across every screen in New York. Millionaire's fiancé exposed. The dark past of Olivia Bennett. Olivia had barely stepped into the living room when she saw her own face plastered on the screen. Old photos, tabloid headlines, and worst of all, a distorted version of the truth. Sources say Olivia was homeless for years and relied on charity and handouts. Some even claim she may have been involved in illegal activities before meeting Daniel Grant. The lies hit like a sledgehammer. Olivia gripped the back of the couch, her knuckles white. Mia and Lucas, playing nearby, looked up in confusion. "Mommy? What's wrong?" Daniel, standing beside her, didn't hesitate. He turned off the TV. His voice was steel. "We fight back." Within hours, Daniel had arranged a press conference. Every major news outlet was invited. The entire country was watching. The moment Daniel walked onto the stage, microphones turned toward him. Cameras clicked in rapid succession. The air buzzed with tension. Daniel took a deep breath. Then he began. "My name is Daniel Grant. I am here today to tell you the truth." The reporters leaned in. "There has been a campaign to destroy the reputation of the woman I love. Lies, fabrications, but here's what you really need to know." His voice was steady, unshaken. Olivia Bennett was a victim. She was abandoned. She was left to raise 2 children alone. And despite that, she never gave up. She worked tirelessly to provide for them, to give them the life they deserve. His eyes swept the crowd. "She is not a scandal. She is a warrior." Silence. Then a voice from the crowd. "And what about Ryan Parker?" Daniel smiled coldly. "Ryan Parker is a coward, a man who only came back when he thought he could gain something. But let me be clear. He will never get near Olivia or those children again." A wave of applause erupted. The room shook with it. The narrative was shifting. And Daniel had just won the first round. But Ryan wasn't done yet. That night, Daniel received an anonymous message. "You think you've won. You have no idea what's coming." Attached was a single image, Mia and Lucas at their school. A warning. Daniel's blood ran cold. Ryan had crossed the line, and Daniel was going to end it. Ryan Parker's threat had shaken Daniel to his core, but it did not break him. Instead, it solidified his resolve. If Ryan thought intimidation would make Daniel back down, he had severely underestimated him. The morning after receiving the chilling message, Daniel was already in motion. His first stop was the office of Detective Alan Morris, a veteran investigator with an ironclad reputation. "I want Ryan Parker arrested," Daniel declared as he placed his phone on the detective's desk, showing the anonymous message. Morris studied the screen, then met Daniel's gaze. "This is serious, but threats alone won't get him behind bars. We need something bigger." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then let's find it." Sophia, Daniel's assistant, had been digging into Ryan's past ever since the custody battle began. That afternoon, she burst into Daniel's office, eyes blazing with urgency. "I found something," she said, dropping a folder onto his desk. Inside was a record of past abuse cases. Ryan Parker wasn't just a negligent father. He was a predator. "This isn't the first time he's threatened children," Sophia revealed. Among the documents was a police report from 6 years ago, one that detailed how a young girl had accused Ryan of violence. The case had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. Daniel's grip tightened around the papers. "We take this to the authorities. Now." With this new evidence, Detective Morris moved fast. The very next evening, Ryan Parker was dragged out of his apartment in handcuffs. The cameras were already there, flashing, recording his humiliation. Ryan thrashed, yelling at the officers, "This is a setup. I'm innocent." But the truth had already spread. His past had caught up with him. Mia and Lucas were finally safe. The news of Ryan's arrest and upcoming trial flooded every major network. Daniel and Olivia could finally breathe. But Daniel wasn't finished. At a televised event, he made an announcement that would change lives forever. "I am establishing the Bennett Grant Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers and children escape poverty and abuse." The audience erupted in applause. Olivia, standing beside him, squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "It's just the beginning." A month later, in a small but elegant ceremony, Daniel and Olivia finally exchanged vows. Mia and Lucas stood proudly by their mother's side. When the officiant spoke the words, "You may kiss the bride," Mia cheered the loudest. As Daniel leaned in, he whispered, "Forever." And Olivia believed him. Months later, Daniel watched as Olivia stood in front of a packed auditorium, speaking about her journey. "Years ago, I thought I was invisible," she said, voice steady, strong. "But someone saw me. Someone refused to let me disappear." Her gaze met Daniel's. "I stand here today because of love, a love that refused to let me go." The crowd erupted into applause. And as Daniel watched Olivia, Mia, and Lucas smile in the spotlight, he knew. As the camera lingers on the image of Daniel, Olivia, Mia, and Lucas, finally a family, finally safe, the screen fades into a soft glow. The echoes of Olivia's final words still linger. "I stand here today because of love, a love that refused to let me go." And isn't that what we all hope for? That someone, somewhere, will refuse to let us fall. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Or maybe you've been the one to help someone in need. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words could inspire someone else to believe in hope again. And if this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's another story coming soon, one that might just change the way you see the world. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love. Love